In the previous episode, Why the Chaser Awakens First, we explored how awakening is not a reward, but an exposure. The chaser awakens early because their system is designed to feel, to attach, and to become conscious through emotional intensity. Episode 4 begins where that realization naturally leads. If the chaser awakens through feeling, why does the runner seem to do the opposite? Why does one open while the other disappears? The answer is unsettling but clarifying. The runner's avoidance is not a conscious rejection. It is a survival language. Inspired by the teachings of Ainslie MacLeod in the instruction, this perspective invites us to see behavior not as personality, but as soul strategy shaped long before this lifetime. Just as the chaser's soul agreed to awaken through exposure, the runner's soul agreed to learn through resistance. From the outside, avoidance looks like choice. Silence appears intentional. Distance feels personal. But at the level of the nervous system and the soul contract, avoidance is often automatic, a reflex born from lifetimes of emotional overwhelm, identity loss, or relational collapse. For the runner, the twin flame connection doesn't simply activate love. It activates everything that has ever been unsafe about love. Where the chaser's system opens under intensity, the runner's system closes. Where the chaser moves toward awareness, the runner moves toward shutdown. This is not immaturity or lack of depth. It is a different wiring, one designed to protect identity at all costs. Ainslie MacLeod teaches that souls often choose lessons that feel uncomfortable, even frightening, because growth does not occur in comfort. The runner's lesson is not union. It is confrontation with avoidance itself. Their soul learns through postponement, denial, and the illusion of control. Avoidance, then, becomes a language, a way of saying this is too much when words fail, a way of preserving the self when intimacy feels annihilating, a way of delaying awakening until the soul feels strong enough to survive it. This is why reasoning with a runner rarely works. This is why explanations, reassurance, and love often intensify the flight instead of calming it. You are not speaking to their conscious mind. You are triggering their survival response. For the chaser, understanding this marks an important transition. Awakening is no longer about fixing the connection. It becomes about releasing the illusion that the runner's behavior is a verdict on your worth. Avoidance is not absence of feeling. Often, it is the presence of too much feeling, arriving before the inner structures can hold it. This reframing does not excuse harm, nor does it ask the chaser to wait indefinitely. What it does is dissolve the most painful illusion of all, that the runner is choosing distance because love is lacking. In reality, the runner runs because awakening feels dangerous, and their soul, just like yours, is following a path it once agreed to walk. Episode 4 will continue by exploring why, for the runner, awakening doesn't feel like expansion, but like the threat of disappearance itself. To understand the runner's experience, we must release the idea that awakening is universally perceived as expansion, light, or freedom. For some souls, especially those carrying deep survival imprints, awakening feels like the opposite. It feels like death. While the chaser experiences awakening as painful exposure, the runner experiences it as existential threat. The intensity of the twin flame connection does not gently invite awareness. It dismantles the inner architecture the runner has relied on to survive. For the runner, identity is not fluid, it is fortified. Over lifetimes and ancestral lines, many runners have learned that emotional openness leads to loss. Loss of self, loss of safety, loss of control. Their sense of identity was built not around connection, but around containment. Feelings were managed, minimized, or buried. Needs were delayed. Vulnerability was equated with danger. When awakening begins, it does not whisper, it invades. Inspired by Ainslie MacLeod's teachings in the instruction, this moment can be understood as the soul encountering a lesson it has postponed across time. Awakening asks the runner to dismantle coping structures that once ensured survival. To the conscious mind, this does not feel like growth. It feels like annihilation. What is dying is not the soul, but the identity that kept the soul asleep. For the runner, this identity often includes emotional self-sufficiency, detachment as strength control, as safety distance as autonomy. The twin flame connection threatens all of it at once. This is why the runner may describe the connection as overwhelming, suffocating, or destabilizing. It's not the love itself that terrifies them. It's what love demands: presence, honesty, surrender, and emotional embodiment. Awakening exposes the runner to emotions they were never taught to regulate. Unlike the chaser, who moves toward feeling as a gateway to meaning, the runner's system interprets intensity as a signal to escape. The nervous system enters a freeze or flight response, and the psyche translates this as, "I am losing myself." In many cases, the fear is not symbolic, it is somatic. The body reacts as if a real death is occurring: panic, numbness, dissociation, or abrupt withdrawal. From the soul's perspective, this moment is inevitable. Ainslie MacLeod explains that souls often delay lessons until circumstances make avoidance impossible. The runner's awakening is postponed not because it is less important, but because it is more destabilizing. This does not mean the runner is incapable of awakening. It means their awakening will come through collapse, not pursuit. Through the breakdown of avoidance, not the search for meaning. Understanding this shifts the chaser's perception. The runner is not running from love. They are running from the internal death of an identity they have not yet learned how to live without. And until the runner trusts that something stronger can emerge after that death, escape will feel safer than transformation. The next topic will explore how the runner's nervous system responds to this threat, not by opening, but by shutting down entirely. When the twin flame connection intensifies, the chaser's system opens. Sensations sharpen, emotions surface, awareness expands through feeling. But for the runner, the same intensity produces the opposite response. Their nervous system does not open, it shuts down. This difference is not psychological preference. It is biological, emotional, and deeply conditioned across time. The runner's nervous system is wired for containment, not expansion. Where the chaser becomes hyper-aware under emotional activation, the runner becomes hypo-responsive. This is the freeze response, a survival state that emerges when fight or flight are no longer perceived as viable options. Inspired by the soul-level framework described by Ainslie MacLeod in the instruction, this pattern is not accidental. It reflects a soul that has learned across lifetimes that feeling too much leads to loss of self. The body remembers this long before the mind can interpret it. When the connection triggers awakening, the runner's system receives the signal as danger. Heart rate may slow or spike unpredictably. Sensation dulls, thoughts fragment, emotional presence disappears. This is not indifference. It is self-preservation. From the outside, this shutdown looks cold, detached, or uncaring. But internally, the runner may feel overwhelmed, flooded, or strangely empty. The system chooses numbness because numbness feels safer than emotional immersion. This is why conversations collapse. This is why silence replaces explanation. Language belongs to the thinking brain, But the runner is no longer operating from that level. They are operating from the autonomic nervous system, where survival overrides meaning. The chaser often mistakes this shutdown for rejection or lack of depth. But the runner is not choosing distance. Their body is choosing regulation. Opening would require remaining present with intense emotion, allowing identity to soften, letting control dissolve, trusting that vulnerability will not erase the self. For the runner's system, these are not neutral acts. They feel dangerous. In many runners, shutdown becomes habitual. The nervous system learns that disconnection restores stability. Emotional intensity becomes associated with chaos, so the system reinforces avoidance, rewarding distance with relief. This is why the runner often appears functional elsewhere, in work, routines, or surface relationships. These environments do not activate the same depth of emotional engagement. The nervous system remains within a manageable range. The twin flame connection, however, exceeds that range. Ainslie MacLeod's work reminds us that the body is a keeper of soul memory. The runner's shutdown is not a failure to love, but a refusal to disintegrate before the inner capacity to rebuild exists. For the chaser, recognizing this distinction is pivotal. It marks the moment where awakening shifts from personalization to perception. The runner's silence is not the absence of feeling. It is the presence of too much, held in a system that has not yet learned how to stay open. In the next topic, we will explore why love itself feels threatening to the runner, not as desire, but as a challenge to identity and autonomy. For the runner, love is rarely experienced as a longing. It is experienced as a threat to identity. This is one of the most difficult truths for the chaser to accept, because it contradicts the romantic narrative that love is universally sought, welcomed, and pursued. But within the runner's internal world, love, especially the depth and intensity of a twin flame connection, does not register as fulfillment. It registers as risk. The runner's identity has been built around separation, autonomy, and self-containment. Across lifetimes and ancestral lines, many runners learned that survival depended on emotional independence. To need less was to hurt less. To detach was to remain intact. Love, then, becomes destabilizing. Inspired by the soul contract framework described by Ainslie MacLeod in the instruction, this pattern is not random. Souls often choose identities that overcorrect previous wounds. Where the chaser's soul leans toward merging and emotional openness, the runner's soul leans toward self-definition through distance. When love enters the runner's life in its most concentrated form, it challenges the very structure that keeps them functional. Love demands presence. It invites surrender. It asks the runner to feel without controlling the outcome. To the runner's psyche, this feels like erosion. This is why love can provoke panic rather than desire. The runner may feel too seen, too needed, or too close. Even affection can trigger withdrawal because it threatens the boundary that defines who they believe themselves to be. It's not that the runner doesn't feel love. Often they feel it intensely, but intensity does not translate into safety. It translates into loss of self. In this context, desire is overridden by preservation. The runner's system asks a simple question: can I remain myself and stay connected at the same time? If the answer feels uncertain, the system chooses identity over intimacy. This is why the runner may sabotage moments of closeness, create conflict, or retreat just as connection deepens. It's not cruelty. It's an unconscious attempt to reassert control. Ainslie MacLeod teaches that souls design lives where identity is tested through contrast. For the runner, love is not meant to be comfortable. It is meant to expose the limits of a self built on avoidance. Understanding this does not mean tolerating emotional absence indefinitely. It does not mean sacrificing your own growth to wait for someone else's awakening. What it does mean is releasing the belief that love would automatically lead the runner toward you if it were real. For the runner, love is real, but it is terrifying because it threatens the identity they do not yet know how to live without. In the next topic, we will explore the deeper soul-level role the runner agreed to carry, the shadow contract that holds avoidance, delay, and resistance as part of the shared lesson. To understand the runner's role more fully, we must move beyond behavior and into agreement. Not the conscious agreements made in this lifetime, but the soul-level contracts formed long before it. In the framework inspired by Ainslie MacLeod's The Instruction, every soul enters life carrying specific lessons, themes, and energetic responsibilities. Some are visible, others are hidden in shadow. The runner's path is shaped by what can be called a shadow contract. This contract is not about love withheld or connection denied. It is about carrying the weight of resistance, of embodying the part of the journey that delays, denies, and avoids awakening so that the full spectrum of consciousness can be experienced within the bond. Where the chaser agreed to awaken through exposure, the runner agreed to awaken through postponement. The shadow contract asks the runner to hold what is difficult to face: fear of intimacy, fear of loss of self, fear of emotional dissolution. These fears are not weaknesses. They are containers of unresolved memory, often accumulated across lifetimes. Many runners carry soul histories where love led to obliteration, emotional, physical, or spiritual. In such histories, merging meant disappearance. To survive, the soul learned to retreat inward, to compartmentalize, to harden its edges. The shadow contract carries these imprints forward, not to repeat them blindly, but to eventually confront them consciously. But confrontation is not immediate. Ainslie MacLeod emphasizes that some lessons are designed to unfold slowly, through resistance rather than pursuit. The runner's contract includes delaying emotional truth, avoiding full presence, preserving identity through distance, mistaking control for safety. This delay is not accidental. It creates contrast. It forces the chaser into early awareness. It exposes attachment, longing, and emotional dependency. Without the runner's resistance, the chaser's awakening would lack depth. In this way, the runner is not the antagonist of the journey. They are its dark mirror. The shadow contract also explains why runners often appear functional, successful, or emotionally composed. Their lesson is not chaos, it is containment. They master external stability while internal truth waits beneath the surface. This is why the runner may sincerely believe they are fine while the chaser is unraveling. The contract allows the illusion of normalcy to persist until it can no longer hold. Eventually, however, shadow contracts activate their own collapse. Avoidance cannot suppress truth indefinitely. The runner's contract does not exempt them from awakening. It postpones it until the cost of remaining asleep outweighs the fear of opening. This is often when the runner experiences profound disorientation, a sudden loss of meaning, an emotional crisis, or the breakdown of identity structures that once felt secure. The very mechanisms that preserved them begin to fail. Understanding the shadow contract does not justify harm or emotional abandonment, but it reframes the dynamic. The runner is not less evolved. They are carrying the densest material. the part of the soul lesson that deals with resistance itself. For the chaser, this understanding can be liberating. It dissolves the fantasy that if you loved differently, healed faster, or waited longer, the runner would awaken sooner. The timing of the runner's awakening is not governed by effort. It is governed by readiness to face the shadow they agreed to carry. In the next topic, we will explore why distance feels safer to the runner than connection, and how avoidance becomes a refuge rather than a rejection. For the runner, distance is not emptiness, it is regulation. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of the runner-chaser dynamic. The chaser experiences distance as loss, abandonment, or emotional erasure. The runner experiences distance as relief, not because love is absent, but because connection overwhelms their capacity to remain intact. Connection activates everything at once. It demands presence, it softens boundaries, it brings unresolved emotions to the surface. For the runner, whose nervous system is already primed to shut down under intensity, connection does not feel nourishing. It feels destabilizing. Distance, by contrast, restores a sense of control. When the runner creates space, emotional or physical, their system returns to equilibrium. Breathing slows, thoughts stabilize, identity feels coherent again. The absence of emotional demand allows the self they know how to be to reassemble. This is why distance can feel safer than love. Inspired by Ainslie MacLeod's perspective in the instruction, this pattern reflects a soul that equates safety with separation. Across lifetimes, the runner may have learned that closeness leads to loss of autonomy, loss of safety, or loss of self. Distance became the medicine. But like all medicines taken too long, it becomes a prison. Distance protects the runner from emotional overwhelm, but it also prevents integration. It keeps awakening at bay by maintaining the illusion of control. As long as the runner can step back, they can remain who they were. Connection threatens that continuity. This is why runners often oscillate, approaching briefly then retreating sharply. The pull toward connection is real. The fear of staying is stronger. Distance becomes the compromise, close enough to feel, far enough to survive. For the chaser, this oscillation feels cruel and confusing, but from the runner's perspective, it is the only way they know how to regulate intimacy without collapsing. Distance also allows the runner to remain functional in other areas of life. They can work, socialize, and engage in surface-level relationships without triggering the depth that demands awakening. The twin flame connection breaks that balance, which is why it must be kept at arm's length. Understanding this does not require tolerating endless absence. It does not ask the chaser to shrink or wait. What it offers is clarity. Distance is not evidence that connection is unwanted. It is evidence that connection is unmanageable, for now. Ainslie MacLeod teaches that souls choose lessons that stretch their capacity. For the runner, the lesson is not to eliminate distance instantly, but to eventually remain present without fleeing, to discover that connection does not erase identity, but reshapes it. Until that discovery is made, distance will continue to feel safer than closeness. In the final topic of this episode, we will explore what happens when running is no longer possible, and how avoidance eventually gives way to awakening, even for the runner. Every avoidance strategy has a lifespan. For a long time, the runner survives by creating distance, emotional, physical, or psychological. Distance regulates their nervous system. It restores identity. It keeps awakening at a tolerable distance. But eventually, the very mechanisms that once protected them begin to fail. This is the moment when running is no longer possible. It does not arrive dramatically or romantically. It often comes quietly, through exhaustion. The runner wakes up one day and realizes that avoidance no longer brings relief. Distance no longer restores peace. The familiar sense of control feels hollow. Inspired by the soul cycle teachings of Ainslie MacLeod in the instruction, this moment marks the activation of a postponed lesson. The soul reaches a threshold where suppression costs more than awakening. This threshold may be triggered by loss, identity collapse, burnout, or a sudden sense of meaninglessness. The runner may still appear functional on the surface, but internally something has shifted. The old self no longer fits. What makes this moment destabilizing is that the runner cannot return to sleep, but they do not yet know how to awaken. Running no longer works because the fear has changed. At first, awakening felt like death. Now, remaining asleep feels like erasure. The avoidance that once preserved identity now threatens it. This is when the runner may experience emotional flooding, intrusive memories, or a resurgence of feelings they believed were resolved. The body begins to demand integration. The nervous system can no longer maintain shutdown indefinitely. Importantly, this awakening does not follow the chaser's path. It does not move through longing or pursuit. It moves through collapse of defenses. The runner is forced to confront what distance was protecting them from vulnerability, grief, desire, and unresolved attachment. This confrontation is often solitary. It rarely involves immediate reunion. And this is where the final illusion dissolves. The journey was never about chasing or being chased. It was about each soul reaching a point where avoidance or attachment could no longer substitute for presence. When running is no longer possible, awakening becomes inevitable. Not because love was demanded, but because truth can no longer be postponed. This completes the arc of episode 4. In the next episode, we will explore what happens after both roles are seen clearly. When the chaser stops chasing and the runner can no longer run, that is where the real transformation begins. If this episode brought you clarity, it's because you're no longer looking at this journey through illusion. You're seeing it through understanding. Whether you are a chaser, learning to release the need to pursue, or someone beginning to recognize the deeper truth behind avoidance, this message is meant to meet you where you are now. If these insights resonate, support the channel by liking this video, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who is still trying to understand silence instead of taking it personally. Your engagement helps this work reach souls who are quietly searching for answers they can't yet put into words. And if you feel called to go a step further, you can also support the channel through Super Thanks. Your contribution helps keep this series alive and allows us to continue exploring these teachings with depth and integrity. Thank you for walking this journey with us. Until the next episode, take a breath, stay present, and remember, nothing here was meant to be forced.